Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Roger Bond adjusted his tie in the mirror of his corner office, watching the Seattle skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 52, he had built Bond Construction from a single pickup truck into the Pacific Northwest's most respected mid-sized construction company. Every building he'd erected was a testament to his philosophy. Solid foundations matter most. His phone buzzed with another text from his daughter Andrea. "Daddy, can we move the cake tasting to Thursday? Wesley's parents want to come too." Roger smiled despite himself. Wesley Kinney, his future son-in-law, seemed decent enough, though something about the kid's entitled attitude rubbed him wrong. The boy had never worked a day of real labor, coasting through life on his family's pharmaceutical money. But Andrea loved him, and Roger had learned long ago that his daughter's happiness came first. The wedding preparations had consumed the last 8 months of Roger's life. The venue alone, the exclusive Fairmont Olympic Hotel, cost more than most people's houses. But Andrea was his only child, his princess, and he'd promised her mother before the divorce that their daughter would never want for anything. "Mr. Bond," his assistant, Stephanie Henderson, peered through the doorway. "Your daughter's online too. She sounds upset." Roger frowned, picking up the phone. "Hey, sweetheart, what's wrong?" "Daddy." Andrea's voice was strained, almost panicked. "We have a problem. The caterer wants another $15,000 for the upgraded menu, and Wesley's parents insist we need the premium bar package. It's another $12,000. $27,000. Roger rubbed his temples. The wedding budget had already ballooned to nearly $200,000, more than many of his workers made in 3 years. But in the background, he could hear Wesley's voice, smooth and persuasive. "Tell him it's what everyone in my family expects, babe. Your dad can handle it." "Of course, sweetheart," Roger said quietly. "I'll transfer the money today. You're the best daddy ever. Wesley says thank you too." After she hung up, Roger stared at the family photo on his desk. Andrea at her high school graduation, radiant in her cap and gown, hugging him tight. When had that grateful, loving girl become someone who saw him as an ATM? His phone rang again. This time it was Don Haney, his oldest friend and business partner. "Roger, we need to talk. I just got off the phone with Nelson Nixon at First National. The Bellevue project payment is delayed again. Apparently, there's some dispute over the permits. We're looking at cash flow issues if this drags on." Roger's jaw tightened. The Bellevue project was their biggest contract, worth $3 million. If the payment was delayed, it would strain every aspect of their business. His workers depended on steady paychecks. Suppliers needed to be paid. And here he was, hemorrhaging money on crystal champagne flutes and imported orchids. "How bad is it, Don?" "Bad enough. Maybe we should consider a business loan to bridge the gap." Roger had never taken unnecessary debt in his life. Bond Construction succeeded because it was financially sound, not leveraged to the hilt like so many competitors who'd collapsed during economic downturns. But his daughter's wedding was in 3 weeks. "Let me think about it," Roger said. "I might have another solution." After ending the call, Roger sat in his leather chair, bought used from a bankruptcy auction 15 years ago, and considered his options. He could liquidate some of his personal investments, maybe take a second mortgage on his house. Andrea would never know the sacrifice he was making. His computer chimed with an email from the wedding planner, Mandy Mackey. The subject line made his blood pressure spike. Final payment schedule and additional requirements. Roger opened it with growing disbelief. Beyond the already astronomical costs, there were new essential additions. A live orchestra for the ceremony, specialty linens flown in from Italy, a professional videographer to complement the photographer, and upgraded transportation for the wedding party. Total additional cost, $43,000. Roger's hands shook slightly as he reached for his phone. When Andrea answered, her voice was bright and cheerful. "Daddy, did you get Mandy's email? Isn't it exciting? Wesley found this amazing orchestra that played at his cousin's wedding in Connecticut. They're flying out just for us." "Andrea," Roger said carefully, "sweetheart, this is getting out of hand. We've already spent." "Daddy, please don't start with the money thing again." Her tone shifted becoming cool and distant. Wesley's family is watching. His mother already made comments about the venue not being quite what she expected. I can't be embarrassed. I'm not trying to embarrass you. I just think, you know what? Never mind. Wesley said you might react this way. His dad offered to help with the costs, but I told him my father would handle it because he loves me. I guess I was wrong. The line went dead. Roger stared at the phone, feeling something crack inside his chest. His daughter, the little girl who used to build pillow forts with him, who cried when she scraped her knee and only daddy's kisses could make it better, had just questioned his love over money. He walked to the window and looked down at the construction site across the street. His workers were pouring concrete for a foundation, their movements precise and practiced. They trusted him to meet payroll, to keep the business strong, to make decisions that protected their families. But they weren't asking him to choose between their livelihoods and his daughter's happiness. His reflection stared back at him from the window. A man caught between the bedrock principles that built his success and the shifting sands of family expectations. Roger Bond had always believed that solid foundations matter most. He was about to find out how solid his really was. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Surface. The Kinney family estate in Medina sat on 3 acres of manicured lakefront, its colonial revival architecture screaming old money and older attitudes. Roger pulled his truck, a practical Ford F-150, perfectly maintained but showing honest wear, into the circular driveway behind a parade of luxury sedans and SUVs. He'd been summoned to a pre-wedding family dinner by Wesley's mother, Glinda Kinney, a woman who spoke in passive-aggressive pleasantries and measured worth by zip codes. Andrea had insisted he come, claiming it was a chance for the families to bond. The front door opened before Roger could knock. Wesley appeared in khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "Mr. Bond, great to see you, sir." Wesley's handshake was firm but brief, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Come in, come in. Everyone's so excited to meet you properly." The foyer featured a chandelier that belonged in a museum and artwork that looked suspiciously authentic. Roger followed Wesley through rooms that showcased wealth rather than warmth, each space designed to impress rather than welcome. In the formal living room, Andrea rushed to hug him. She looked stunning in a designer dress that accentuated her natural beauty, but something in her eyes seemed different, harder, more calculating than the daughter he remembered. "Daddy, I'm so glad you're here." She lowered her voice. Wesley's parents are really important people in their social circle. Just try to fit in, okay? Before Roger could respond, Glinda Kinney approached with the measured grace of a woman accustomed to controlling every social situation. Tall, blonde, and surgically enhanced to maintain an ageless perfection, she extended a manicured hand. "Roger, how wonderful to finally meet Andrea's father properly. We've heard so much about your work." The pause before work was slight but intentional. Roger had dealt with enough clients to recognize condescension wrapped in politeness. "Mrs. Kinney, beautiful home. Thank you. It's been in Martin's family for 3 generations. We believe in maintaining traditions." Her eyes flicked to Roger's suit, a good one, but off the rack rather than bespoke. "Speaking of traditions, we should discuss the wedding arrangements." Martin Kinney emerged for what looked like a private bar, carrying a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He was everything Roger expected, silver-haired, soft around the middle, wearing the kind of casual confidence that came from inherited wealth. Roger, the man of the hour. Martin's bonhomie felt rehearsed. "Can I get you a drink? I've got a 30-year-old Macallan that'll knock your socks off." "Beer's fine, thanks." Martin's smile flickered. "Of course. Stephanie." A uniformed server appeared instantly. "Get Mr. Bond a beer. Something domestic, I assume." The evening proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance of social superiority. Over dinner, served by 2 additional staff members in a dining room designed to seat 14. The conversation systematically excluded Roger from discussions of country clubs, charity galas, and social connections he couldn't possibly share. Wesley's sister, Nina Kinney, a sharp-faced woman in her 30s, dominated much of the conversation with stories about her husband's tech startup and their recent vacation to Martha's Vineyard. Every anecdote seemed designed to highlight a lifestyle Roger couldn't understand or appreciate. Andrea tells us you built your business from nothing, Glinda said during the main course, her tone suggesting this was somehow quaint. How entrepreneurial of you. Hard work and good people, Roger replied simply. Yes, well, we've always believed in the importance of established connections. Wesley's father's pharmaceutical company has been in the family for 40 years. There's something to be said for stability and tradition. Andrea reached across the table to squeeze Wesley's hand. That's what I love about Wesley. He understands quality and class. Not everyone appreciates the finer things. Roger felt the barb hit its target. His daughter was sitting in a room that cost more than most people's annual salaries, disparaging the work ethic that had paid for her education, her car, her entire life. About the wedding, Martin interjected, refilling his whiskey. Glinda and I have been discussing the arrangements. We want to ensure everything meets our family standards. What does that mean? Roger asked. Glinda's smile was perfectly practiced. Well, we've taken the liberty of reviewing your vendor choices. Some of them are adequate, but we'd like to suggest a few upgrades. She slid a folder across the table. Roger opened it to find a revised vendor list with cost comparisons. The suggested improvements would add another $60,000 to the total. We understand this represents a significant investment, Martin continued, but Wesley's wedding will be attended by some very important people. Politicians, business leaders, old family friends. The optics matter. Roger looked at his daughter, waiting for her to object, to defend the choices they'd made together. Instead, Andrea was studying the folder with obvious excitement. Oh my God, the Chateau Margaux for the toast. Daddy, that's what they served at the governor's daughter's wedding. Andrea, Roger said quietly, we've already made these decisions. The vendors we chose are excellent. But these are better, she insisted. Wesley's family knows about these things. Don't you want my wedding to be perfect? I want your wedding to be about love, not a competition. The room fell silent. Glinda's smile became positively arctic. Of course, she said, we all want what's best for the children. But sometimes that requires making sacrifices for their happiness. Wesley leaned forward, his expression earnest, but his words calculated. Mr. Bond, I know this is a lot to ask, but Andrea means everything to me, and I want her to have the wedding she deserves. My parents are happy to contribute, but we thought, well, traditionally, the bride's family handles the wedding expenses. Roger felt the trap closing around him. They'd manipulated the conversation to make him look cheap, unsophisticated, and ultimately unloving if he didn't agree to their demands. I need to think about it, he said. Andrea's face fell. Think about it? Daddy, the wedding is in 2 weeks. I said I need to think about it. The drive home was silent, Andrea staring out the passenger window with obvious disappointment. When Roger pulled into his driveway, a modest but well-maintained house in a middle-class neighborhood that suddenly felt shabby after the Kinney estate, she finally spoke. They're right, you know, about the standards. What standards, sweetheart? Wesley's family moves in different circles. Important circles. This wedding isn't just about us. It's about our future. His connections could open doors I never imagined. Roger studied his daughter's profile in the dashboard light. What happened to the girl who wanted to be a teacher? Who talked about making a difference in kids' lives? I grew up, Daddy. I realized there are easier ways to make a difference. Ways that don't involve living paycheck to paycheck. The words hit Roger like a physical blow. His daughter, the girl he'd raised to value integrity and hard work, was choosing a life based on wealth and status over substance and character. Is that what you think I do? Live paycheck to paycheck. I think you work too hard for too little. Wesley's family appreciates the finer things. They understand quality. Roger watched his daughter walk toward the house, her designer heels clicking on the concrete he'd poured himself 20 years ago. Through the window, he could see her on her phone, probably calling Wesley to complain about her unreasonable father. That night, Roger sat in his study reviewing the family financials. The wedding costs now totaled nearly $300,000, more than he'd spent on his first house. To cover it, he'd have to liquidate his retirement savings, take a second mortgage, and potentially risk the business's cash flow during the Bellevue project delay. But the real cost wasn't financial. His daughter had chosen to align herself with people who measured worth by bank balances and social connections. She was ashamed of the life he'd built, the values he'd taught her, the man he was. Roger Bond had built his reputation on solid foundations. But watching his daughter disappear into a world that despised everything he represented, he wondered if some foundations were meant to crack. The question was what would rise from the rubble. Chapter 3. The Unveiling. 2 days before the wedding, Roger stood in the main warehouse of Bond Construction, watching his crew load equipment for the Bellevue project. The delayed payment had finally come through, but not before forcing him to make the hardest financial decisions of his life. His retirement account was drained, his house carried a second mortgage, and the company's cash reserves sat at dangerously low levels. All for a wedding that had become a monument to everything he didn't believe in. "Boss," Don Haney approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "You sure you're okay? You look like hell." Roger managed a tired smile. "Wedding stress. It'll be over soon." "Yeah, about that." Don shifted uncomfortably. "My wife ran into your Andrea at the mall yesterday. She was with some fancy-looking women, talking pretty loud about the wedding. Stuff about upgrading the menu, imported flowers, some orchestra from back east. And, well, Maria heard her say something about how her father was finally stepping up and paying for a proper wedding instead of the budget version you originally planned." Don's jaw tightened. She called the original plans embarrassing. Roger said she was mortified to have almost settled for something so cheap. The words hit Roger like a sledgehammer. His carefully planned, thoughtfully chosen wedding arrangements, vendors he'd personally vetted, menus he'd tasted, flowers he'd selected with Andrea months ago, had become embarrassing and cheap in his daughter's eyes. "There's more," Dawn continued reluctantly. She was talking about how Wesley's family showed her what real class looked like, how they understood quality in ways that, well, in ways that people like us don't. People like us. His daughter was openly disparaging not just him, but his entire social class, his way of life, everything he represented. Roger's phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. "Daddy, Wesley's parents want to take us to dinner tonight to celebrate. Dress nice. See you at 7. He stared at the message, feeling something cold and hard settle in his chest. Another command performance. Another opportunity to be patronized and dismissed while pretending to be grateful. "Don, I need you to do me a favor. Can you handle the site inspection tomorrow? I might be unavailable." "Sure thing, boss." "But Roger, whatever's eating at you, don't let it fester. I've seen what family poison can do to a good man." That evening, Roger arrived at the Metropolitan Grill, Seattle's most expensive steakhouse, to find the Kinney family already seated at a prime table. Wesley's father Martin was holding court with a story about his golf game, while Glinda and Nina flanked Andrea, examining her manicure and offering suggestions for wedding week skincare. "Daddy!" Andrea rose to kiss his cheek, but her greeting felt performative, staged for the audience. "You look handsome. Is that a new tie?" It wasn't. It was the same tie he'd worn to every important business meeting for the past 5 years. But he made an effort to press his best shirt and polish his shoes, hoping to meet whatever standards were expected. "Roger," Martin boomed, standing to shake hands. "The man who's making all our dreams come true. How's the final countdown treating you?" "Fine," Roger replied, taking his seat. Glinda leaned forward conspiratorially. "We've been discussing the wedding weekend schedule with Andrea. Wesley's family has some traditions we'd love to incorporate." She produced yet another folder, this one containing a detailed itinerary that looked more like a corporate merger than a family celebration. Bachelor party at an exclusive club, rehearsal dinner at a private venue, post-wedding brunch at the country club. "Of course, there are some additional costs," Martin said, his tone suggesting this was a minor detail. "But we thought it would be nice for both families to share in these expenses." Roger opened the folder and scanned the numbers. Another $25,000, presented as a shared expense, but clearly expected to come from his pocket. "This is generous," he said carefully, "but we're already at budget capacity. Nina laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Budget capacity? Daddy, it's a wedding, not a business meeting. You can't put a price on Andrea's happiness. I'm not putting a price on anything. I'm being responsible. Responsible, Glinda repeated, as if the word tasted sour. Well, of course, we all have different definitions of responsibility. Some people prioritize fiscal caution. Others prioritize family joy. The implication was clear. Caring about money meant caring less about family. Roger felt the familiar burn of carefully constructed insults designed to make him appear small and selfish. Wesley reached across the table to take Andrea's hand. Babe, maybe we should tell him about the other thing. Andrea's eyes lit up. Oh, Daddy, Wesley's father has the most amazing news. Martin smiled broadly. I've been in discussions with some associates about a business opportunity. Construction management for a new pharmaceutical campus. Big project, very lucrative. He slid a business card across the table. The company is looking for a local contractor with the right connections. Someone who understands how to work with quality clients. Roger examined the card. Kenny Pharmaceutical Development, Martin's company. The business opportunity was a job offer, thinly disguised as a favor. What would this involve? Roger asked. Well, naturally, we need someone who appreciates our standards, our attention to detail, our way of doing business. Martin's smile was predatory. Think of it as joining the family business in a way. Andrea squeezed Wesley's hand excitedly. Isn't that wonderful? Wesley's father is offering to help expand your business. Roger understood the offer perfectly. Accept their money, their standards, their control over his company and his life. Become their pet contractor, dependent on their goodwill and subject to their expectations. Transform himself from an independent businessman into a grateful servant of their dynasty. I'll consider it, Roger said neutrally. Consider it? Nina seemed genuinely surprised. Dad's offering you the opportunity of a lifetime. Every opportunity has a cost, Roger replied. The table fell silent. Glinda's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Some people, she said quietly, have difficulty recognizing generosity when it's offered. Andrea looked mortified. Daddy, they're trying to help us. To help our family. I understand that, sweetheart. Do you? Because sometimes I wonder if you understand anything about what I need. What I want. What kind of life I'm trying to build. Roger studied his daughter's face. The face he'd kissed goodbye every morning when she was little. The face that had beamed with pride when he taught her to ride a bicycle. The face that had cried on his shoulder when her first boyfriend broke her heart. Tell me about the life you're trying to build, he said quietly. Andrea glanced around the table, drawing strength from the Kenny family's presence. A life with standards, with quality, with people who appreciate fine things and understand social responsibility. Social responsibility? Yes, contributing to the community in meaningful ways. Wesley's family serves on charity boards, hosts fundraisers, makes a real difference in important circles. Roger felt something snap inside him. And what do I do, Andrea? What kind of contribution do I make? You work construction, Daddy. It's honest work, but it's not the same as what Wesley's family does. They move in circles where real decisions get made. Real decisions. Wesley leaned forward earnestly. Mr. Bond, no disrespect intended, but there's a difference between building things and building influence. Between moving dirt and moving society forward. Roger looked around the table at these people who had convinced his daughter that her father's life's work was somehow lesser, that the buildings he'd constructed, the jobs he'd created, the honest living he'd earned was inferior to their inherited wealth and social connections. You're right, he said finally. There is a difference. Relief flickered across their faces. The difference, Roger continued, is that when I build something, it lasts. It serves a purpose. It houses families, protects workers, creates real value in the real world. The temperature at the table dropped perceptibly. Daddy, Andrea said warningly, your social influence, your charity boards, your important circles, they're all built on the work of people like me. People who wake up early, work with their hands, solve actual problems instead of talking about them over expensive dinners. Martin's face had turned red. Now see here. I've seen enough, Roger said, standing. Andrea, I love you. I'll always love you. But I won't apologize for the life I've built or the man I am. Not to anyone. He placed his napkin on the table and walked away, leaving behind the shocked silence and his daughter's furious whisper. I can't believe he just embarrassed us like that. Outside the restaurant, Roger sat in his truck and watched Seattle's glittering skyline. Half those buildings had been constructed by companies he'd worked with, built by men and women who shared his values and understood the dignity of honest work. His daughter had chosen her side. Now Roger Bond had to choose his. The wedding was in 36 hours. It was time to find out what happened when a man with solid foundations decided to stop apologizing for his strength. Chapter 4. The Wedding Day Reckoning. The morning of Andrea's wedding dawned gray and drizzling, typical Seattle weather that the expensive wedding planner had failed to factor into her outdoor ceremony contingency plans. Roger stood in his hotel room at the Fairmont Olympic, adjusting his tuxedo tie and watching the chaos unfold in the courtyard below through rain-streaked windows. Wedding staff scurried around like ants, moving decorations under a hastily erected tent while Mandy Mackey barked orders through a headset. The imported Italian linens were getting soaked, the specialized lighting system was shorting out, and the 100-piece ice sculpture was melting faster than planned. His phone had been buzzing all morning with increasingly frantic texts from Andrea, each one more demanding than the last. Daddy, where are you? I need you here now. The photographers want family shots in 20 minutes. Wesley's family is asking where you are, and I look like an idiot. Please don't ruin my wedding day by being weird. Roger finished dressing methodically, the way he approached every important task. He'd spent the sleepless night making his final preparations, and now it was time to see them through. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Don Haney stood in the hallway, uncomfortable in his rented tuxedo, but grinning widely. You ready for this circus, boss? More than you know. Did you bring what I asked for? Don held up a manila envelope. Everything you requested. Though I gotta say, Roger, this seems like overkill for a wedding. It's not about the wedding anymore. They rode the elevator down in silence, emerging into the hotel's opulent lobby where wedding guests were already gathering for the pre-ceremony cocktail hour. Roger recognized several faces from the construction industry, longtime friends who'd supported his business over the years. But the majority were Wesley's people, sleek, expensive-looking individuals who spoke in the carefully modulated tones of inherited privilege. Roger, Martin Kinney approached with arms spread wide, his bonhomie cranked up to 11. There's the man of the hour. How are you holding up? Big day, big day. I'm fine, Martin. Everything's proceeding as planned. Glinda appeared at her husband's side, resplendent in a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Roger, we were just telling everyone about your generous contribution to this lovely celebration. Such a devoted father. Roger smiled politely, just doing what needs to be done. The ceremony itself was everything Andrea had dreamed of and everything Roger had come to despise. The imported orchids, the string quartet flown in from New York, the designer, everything screaming wealth and status rather than love and commitment. He walked his daughter down the aisle, her arm linked through his, feeling like he was delivering her to a world that would erase everything he'd tried to teach her. Andrea looked stunning, but her smile seemed strained, her eyes constantly darting to assess the crowd's reaction rather than focusing on the man she was marrying. Wesley stood at the altar looking every inch the privileged prince, his expression more triumphant than loving. The ceremony proceeded without incident. Roger played his role perfectly, the proud, grateful father beaming with joy at his daughter's happiness. He shook hands, accepted congratulations, and posed for endless photographs with people who barely concealed their condescension behind polite smiles. The real test came at the reception. The Fairmont's grand ballroom had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, or perhaps a nightmare of excess. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across tables draped in silk, while servers in white gloves circulated with champagne that cost more per bottle than his workers made in a day. Roger found his seat at the head table, surrounded by the wedding party and both families. The The speeches began with Wesley's best man regaling the crowd with stories of their prep school adventures and family ski trips to Aspen. Nina Kinney followed with a heartfelt tribute to her brother's discerning taste in women and his bride's remarkable adaptation to our family standards. Then it was Roger's turn. He stood slowly, tapping his champagne glass with a sterling silver knife. The room fell silent, hundreds of faces turning toward him with polite expectation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Roger began, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom. "Thank you all for joining us to celebrate Andrea and Wesley's wedding." Polite applause rippled through the crowd. As Andrea's father, I've had the privilege of watching her grow from a little girl who built sandcastles and dreamed of being a teacher into the woman you see today. Andrea beamed at him from her seat, relief evident in her expression. I've also had the opportunity to get to know Wesley and his family over these past months, to understand their values, their priorities, their vision for my daughter's future. Roger paused, letting his gaze sweep across the Kinney family table. I've learned a great deal about social status, about the importance of appearances, about what really matters to some people in this world. A subtle shift in the room's energy suggested that some guests were picking up on an undercurrent they couldn't quite identify. I built my business on the principle that solid foundations matter most, that honest work creates lasting value, that character matters more than pedigree. Martin Kinney's smile was beginning to look forced, but I've come to realize that not everyone shares those values. Some people believe that worth is measured by bank accounts, that respect should be based on social connections, that a man's character matters less than his checking account balance. Glenda Kinney's face had gone pale. So I want to thank the Kinney family for teaching me what really matters to my daughter, for showing me exactly where I stand in her priorities. Andrea was beginning to look confused, her smile faltering. Which brings me to my wedding gift to the happy couple. Roger reached into his jacket and withdrew the manila envelope Dawn had given him. You see, when you build a business from nothing, you learn to pay attention to details, to check references, to investigate before you invest. He opened the envelope and spread several documents across the head table. So naturally, when my daughter became engaged to Wesley, I did what any careful father would do. I looked into his family's business dealings. The room was dead silent now, tension crackling like electricity. Kinney Pharmaceutical has some interesting accounting practices, offshore subsidiaries, creative tax arrangements, some very questionable partnerships with overseas suppliers. Martin Kinney shot to his feet. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" "I'm giving a toast to honesty and transparency," Roger replied calmly. "For instance, did everyone know that Wesley's trust fund, the one funding their lavish lifestyle, comes primarily from selling overpriced medications to elderly patients who can't afford them?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Wesley's face had turned ashen. "Or that Kinney Pharmaceutical has been under FDA investigation for 3 years for falsifying safety data on their arthritis medication." "This is outrageous," Glenda shrieked. "Security." "Oh, there's more," Roger continued, his voice carrying over the growing chaos. "The really interesting part is how they've been laundering money through their charitable foundation. You know, the one that Nina runs? The one that's supposed to help underprivileged children, but somehow spends 90% of its budget on administrative costs." Andrea was staring at her new husband in horror. "Wesley, is this true?" Wesley's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Roger turned to face his daughter directly. "This is the family you chose, Andrea. These are the standards you found so appealing. These are the people whose approval was worth more than your relationship with your father." "Daddy, I didn't know." "You didn't want to know. You were too busy being embarrassed by your father's honest work to ask any hard questions about where their money really comes from." Hotel security was moving toward the head table now, but Roger wasn't finished. "So here's my wedding gift to you both, the truth. About who you really married, Andrea. And Wesley? About who paid for this fairy tale wedding." He pulled out one final document. "You see, I never actually made the final payment to the venue, or the caterer, or the florist, or any of the vendors for this evening's celebration." The color drained from Andrea's face. "I was going to. Right up until last night, I was prepared to bankrupt myself to pay for a wedding that celebrated everything I despise. But then I realized something important. Roger's voice carried to every corner of the suddenly silent ballroom. I realized that enabling your selfishness wasn't love, it was cowardice. That paying for you to join a family of criminals wasn't generosity, it was betrayal of everything I believe in. Andrea stood shakily. Daddy, please, everyone's watching. Yes, they are. They're watching you learn that actions have consequences. That when you choose to align yourself with people who measure worth by wealth, you might discover that their wealth comes from destroying other people's lives. Wesley finally found his voice, but it cracked with panic. You can't do this. The contracts are signed. The contracts require payment, Wesley. Payment I'm not making. Payment your family assured me they could handle if necessary. Martin Kinney looked like he was having a heart attack. The accounts, they're frozen. The investigation. What investigation? Andrea whispered. Roger smiled grimly. The one that started when I delivered my evidence to the FBI 3 days ago. Turns out they're very interested in pharmaceutical companies that defraud Medicare and launder money through fake charities. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Guests rushed for exits. Hotel management swarmed the head table. And somewhere in the distance, sirens were approaching. Andrea grabbed Roger's arm desperately. Daddy, fix this. You have to fix this. I did fix it, sweetheart. I stopped pretending that money was more important than character. I stopped enabling your transformation into someone I didn't recognize. You're ruining my wedding. Get out. Get out. Roger looked at his daughter, really looked at her, for what he suspected might be the last time. Her beautiful face was twisted with rage and entitlement. No trace of the loving child he'd raised. No, Andrea, you ruined it yourself. You just didn't realize it until now. He turned and walked away, leaving behind the wreckage of a wedding, a relationship, and the illusions that had nearly destroyed them both. Behind him, his daughter's screams echoed through the ballroom. You're ruining my wedding. Get out. But Roger Bond was already gone. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Begins. Roger sat in his truck in the hotel parking garage, rain drumming against the windshield as chaos erupted 5 floors above him. Through the concrete structure, he could hear sirens, shouting, and the general pandemonium of a society wedding disintegrating in real time. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts, but he ignored them all except one. Don Haney's message was simple. It's done. Every news outlet in the city has the story. You sure about this? Roger typed back. Never been more sure of anything. The plan had taken months to execute properly. While Andrea and the Kinneys had been focused on flower arrangements and seating charts, Roger had been conducting his own investigation. What started as routine due diligence on his future son-in-law's family had uncovered a web of corruption that reached far beyond simple tax evasion. Kinney Pharmaceutical wasn't just overcharging elderly patients. They were actively falsifying safety data on medications that caused dangerous side effects. Their charitable foundation wasn't just inefficient. It was a front for laundering money from offshore accounts tied to overseas drug cartels. Wesley's trust fund wasn't just inherited wealth. It was blood money built on the suffering of people who couldn't afford proper medical care. Roger's phone rang. The caller ID showed FBI Agent Morris Callahan. Bond here. Mr. Bond, this is Agent Callahan. I wanted to personally thank you for your cooperation in this investigation. The evidence you provided is exactly what we needed to move forward. What happens now? Arrests, asset seizures, a very long legal process. The Kinney family's accounts have been frozen pending investigation, which means they can't pay for the wedding even if they wanted to. Exactly. I hope you understand that your daughter might face some scrutiny as well, given her new marital connection to the family. Roger closed his eyes. I understand. For what it's worth, Mr. Bond, what you did took real courage. Most people wouldn't risk their family relationships to expose this kind of corruption. After hanging up, Roger sat in the silence of his truck and tried to process what he'd just done. He destroyed his relationship with his daughter to expose criminals who were harming innocent people. He'd chosen justice over family loyalty, principle over peace. But had he also chosen revenge over love? His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Wesley. We need to talk. Meet me at the hotel bar in 20 minutes. Come alone." Roger stared at the message for a long moment, then started his truck. Time to face the consequences of his choices. The Fairmont's Georgian room was eerily quiet compared to the chaos upstairs. Most of the hotel staff had been pulled into wedding damage control, leaving the elegant bar nearly empty except for a few business travelers nursing expensive drinks and Wesley Kinney slumped in a corner booth. Roger's new son-in-law looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. His perfect hair was disheveled, his bow tie hung loose around his neck, and his eyes held the hollow look of a man watching his entire world collapse. "You really did it," Wesley said as Roger approached. "You actually destroyed everything." Roger slid into the booth across from him. "I exposed the truth. Your family destroyed themselves. My family built something. We employed thousands of people, contributed to medical research, supported charities. Your family got rich selling dangerous drugs to sick people. Your research was fabricated. Your charities were fronts for money laundering." Wesley laughed bitterly. "You self-righteous bastard. You think you're some kind of hero? You just destroyed your own daughter's life to prove a point. I saved my daughter from becoming complicit in your family's crimes." "Saved her? Roger, she's married to me now, legally connected to everything you just exposed. When the media gets hold of this story, her name will be linked to every headline about pharmaceutical fraud and money laundering." The words hit Roger like a physical blow. In his determination to expose the Kinneys, he'd inadvertently painted Andrea as either a co-conspirator or a victim. Either way, her life was about to become a public nightmare. "She can get an annulment," Roger said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Can she? We're legally married. The ceremony was completed before your little revelation. And now that my family's assets are frozen, guess who's going to be responsible for all the wedding debts you refused to pay?" Roger's blood chilled. "What are you talking about?" Wesley pulled out his phone and showed Roger a series of contracts. Every vendor, every service provider, every expense for this wedding. The contracts are in her name too. Remember? Joint liability for the happy couple. That's impossible. I was handling the payments. You were handling some of the payments. But Andrea signed additional contracts for all the upgrades, all the special editions my family suggested. We encouraged her to take ownership of her special day. Wesley's smile was vicious. "She's personally liable for about $200,000 in wedding debt, Roger. Debt that neither you nor my frozen family assets can pay." The magnitude of his mistake began to dawn on Roger. In his righteous fury, he'd exposed criminals but left his daughter holding the bag for massive debts she couldn't possibly pay. "You planned this," Roger said quietly. "Of course I planned this. Did you really think my family got rich by being careless? We've been using asset protection strategies for years. Shell companies, trust structures, liability shields. Even if the FDA investigation had eventually caught up to us, our personal wealth was protected." Wesley leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you forced our hand early. You made us activate emergency protocols before we were ready. So now my family will survive this financially, but your daughter? Your precious little princess who just wanted a fairy tale wedding. What do you want? Nothing. The damage is done. I just wanted you to understand exactly what your moral crusade has accomplished. Andrea is married to a man whose family fortune is gone, facing massive personal debt, and about to become the center of a media circus. Her teaching career? Finished. Her social aspirations? Laughable. Her relationship with her father." Wesley stood up, straightening his disheveled appearance. "Well, let's just say that when she finds out you knew about the debt situation and let her sign those contracts anyway, she's going to realize exactly how much her daddy really loves her." Roger watched his son-in-law walk away, feeling the foundations of his righteous certainty begin to crack. He'd wanted to teach Andrea about consequences, about the importance of character over wealth. Instead, he trapped her in a nightmare of debt and scandal that would follow her for years. Upstairs, the wedding reception had completely dissolved. Guests fled into the Seattle night, while vendors demanded payment and reporters gathered like vultures. And somewhere in that chaos was his daughter, facing the worst night of her life because her father had chosen principle over protection. Roger Bond had always believed that solid foundations were the most important thing, but he was beginning to understand that sometimes even the strongest foundations could crumble if they were built on the wrong ground. His phone buzzed with a call from Don Haney. "Roger, you need to get down here. Now." "What's wrong?" "Andrea's at the construction site. She's not doing well, boss. She's asking for you." Roger closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his choices settling on his shoulders like concrete. "I'll be right there." The reckoning was just beginning. Chapter 6: The Price of Truth. The Bond construction site sat on the edge of downtown Seattle, a half-finished office building that represented Roger's largest contract and biggest risk. Floodlights illuminated the skeletal structure against the stormy night sky, but Roger's attention was focused on the small figure sitting on a stack of concrete blocks near the construction trailer. Andrea had changed out of her wedding dress into jeans and a sweatshirt, but she still wore her veil, now torn and muddy from the rain. She looked up as Roger approached, her makeup streaked with tears and her eyes red from crying. "Daddy." Her voice sounded like she was 12 years old again. "I'm here, sweetheart. Wesley's gone. He left. Right after the FBI agents arrived, he got in his car and drove away." She laughed bitterly. "On our wedding night. He abandoned me at my own reception." Roger sat down beside her on the concrete blocks, not caring about his expensive tuxedo. "I'm sorry, Andrea." "Are you?" "Because Wesley told me some very interesting things before he left. About contracts I signed. About debt I'm responsible for. About how you knew this would happen and let me walk into it anyway." Roger felt the weight of her accusation settle into his chest. "I didn't know about the debt structure. I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" "Daddy, I owe vendors $200,000 for a wedding that ended with my new husband's family being arrested. The photographers are demanding payment, the caterers are threatening to sue, and every news outlet in the city is calling me for comment about my connection to pharmaceutical fraud. We'll figure something out." "You'll what?" "Pay for it." "With what money?" "Wesley's family made sure you'd already spent everything on the earlier payments. They trapped us both, Daddy. And you walked right into their trap because you were so focused on proving how moral and righteous you are." Roger stared at the construction site around them, the half-built structure that represented years of careful planning and honest work. She was right. In his determination to expose the Kennys, he'd been outmaneuvered by people who understood financial manipulation better than he understood moral clarity. "I was trying to save you from becoming like them," he said quietly. "Like them? Daddy, I'm worse than them now. They're criminals with expensive lawyers and offshore accounts. I'm just a broke schoolteacher married to a fugitive with massive debt and no way to pay it." Andrea pulled off her veil and threw it into the mud. "Do you know what the worst part is? I actually thought you were proud of me today. When you were giving your speech, for just a moment, I thought my daddy was going to say something beautiful about how much he loved me. I do love you. No, you love the idea of me. The version of me that agrees with all your values and makes all the choices you approve of. But you don't love the real me, the me that wanted nice things and social status and a life that was easier than what you had." Roger felt tears burning his eyes. "That's not true, isn't it? You exposed Wesley's family not to protect me, but to punish me, to prove that you were right and I was wrong, to show everyone what happens when people reject Roger Bond's version of morality." "Andrea, I get it now, Daddy. This was never about the money or the wedding or even Wesley's family. This was about you being angry that your little girl grew up into someone who didn't worship your working-class hero complex." The words cut deeper than anything Wesley had said. Roger looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the entitled princess he'd been fighting, but a young woman who'd been caught between two worlds and crushed by the collision. "You're right," he said finally. Andrea blinked in surprise. "What?" "You're right. About all of it. I was angry. I was hurt that you seemed ashamed of me, ashamed of the life I'd built. I wanted to prove that my values were better than theirs, and I used you to do it. Daddy, I told myself I was protecting you, But really, I was protecting my own ego. I couldn't stand that my daughter preferred their world to mine, so I destroyed their world and trapped you in the wreckage. Roger stood up and walked to the edge of the construction site, looking out at the city lights through the rain. I spent so much time building solid foundations for buildings that I forgot to build them for relationships. I made everything about being right instead of being loving. Behind him, Andrea's voice was small and broken. So what do we do now? Roger turned back to face her. We fix it. Not the debt. That's just money. We fix us. Ow! I don't know yet. But I know it starts with me admitting that I was wrong. Not about Wesley's family being criminals. They are. But about everything else. About forcing you to choose between your father and your future. About making your love conditional on your values. About putting my pride ahead of your happiness. Andrea wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I was wrong too, Daddy. About being ashamed of you. About caring more about what Wesley's family thought than what you felt. About measuring love by how much money someone spends on you. You weren't wrong to want more, sweetheart. You were wrong to think I wasn't enough. But I was wrong to think that proving you wrong was more important than proving I loved you. They sat in silence for a while, father and daughter on a construction site in the rain, surrounded by the wreckage of a wedding and a relationship that both had helped destroy. Finally, Andrea spoke. Wesley was right about one thing. My name is going to be all over the news. My teaching career is probably over. No school district is going to hire someone connected to pharmaceutical fraud. Then we'll find you something else. Something better. With what qualifications? I'm a failed teacher married to a criminal with massive debt and no job prospects. Roger was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled for the first time in hours. Actually, you're a failed teacher married to a criminal with massive debt, no job prospects, and a father who owns a construction company that's about to get very busy. What do you mean? The Bellevue project payment came through this week. We're financially stable again. And I just remembered something. When the Kinney family's assets get seized, someone's going to need to liquidate their properties. Real estate, commercial buildings, that pharmaceutical campus they were planning. Andrea looked confused. So the government is going to need contractors to handle the demolition, renovation, and resale of those properties. Local contractors with solid reputations and clean records. Understanding dawned in Andrea's eyes. You're going to bid on the contracts? We're going to bid on the contracts. You know the Kinney properties better than anyone. You spent months studying their business, their holdings, their plans. That knowledge is valuable. Daddy, I don't know anything about construction. You don't need to. You need to know business, finance, project management. You need to understand clients and deadlines and quality control. Roger grinned. You need to be smart, organized, and tough enough to handle entitled, rich people who think they can push you around. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership. Bond and bond construction. A chance to build something real instead of just dreaming about social status. Andrea was quiet for a long moment. What about the wedding debt? One problem at a time. First, we rebuild our relationship. Then we rebuild our lives. Then we make sure the people who tried to destroy us understand exactly who they were messing with. That sounds like revenge, Daddy. Roger smiled grimly. No, sweetheart. Revenge was what I did tonight. Emotional, destructive, and ultimately harmful to everyone, including myself. What I'm talking about now is justice. And justice, when it's done right, benefits everyone except the guilty. Andrea stood up and brushed the mud off her jeans. So what's the first step? We go home. We get some sleep. Tomorrow we start over. And the Kinneys? The Kinneys are about to learn that Roger Bond isn't just good at building foundations. He's also very good at tearing down structures that were built on corruption. As they walked toward Roger's truck, Andrea slipped her hand into his for the first time in months. Daddy, I'm sorry for everything I said. About being embarrassed by you. About wanting Wesley's family's approval more than yours. You're not perfect, but you're good. And I forgot how important that is. I'm sorry too, sweetheart, for making you feel like you had to choose between loving me and wanting more for yourself. For letting my pride matter more than your happiness. Roger started the truck and pulled out of the construction site, leaving behind the scene of their confrontation. In the rearview mirror, he could see the skeletal outline of the building he was constructing, solid and strong despite the storm. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new problems to solve. But tonight, for the first time in months, Roger Bond felt like he was building on solid ground again. The foundation was damaged, but not destroyed. And with careful work, patience, and love, it could be made stronger than ever. Chapter 7. The Rebuilding. 3 weeks after the wedding disaster, Roger stood in his office reviewing contracts while Andrea sat across from him, surrounded by legal documents and financial spreadsheets. The morning news played silently on the wall-mounted TV, showing footage of federal agents loading boxes from the Kinney family mansion. "The asset forfeiture list is incredible," Andrea said, looking up from her laptop. 17 properties, including 3 commercial buildings, a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility, and that pharmaceutical campus they were planning in Bellevue. "What's the total value?" "Conservative estimate? $47 million. The government's going to liquidate everything to pay restitution to victims of the Medicare fraud." Roger whistled low. "And someone's going to need contractors to handle the renovation and demolition work." "Already on it. I've been networking with contacts at the GSA and the U.S. Attorney's Office." Andrea's smile was sharp and confident. "Turns out having inside knowledge of the Kinney properties is valuable. I know which buildings have structural issues, which ones are worth renovating, and which ones should be torn down." The transformation in his daughter over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable. Gone was the entitled princess obsessed with social status. In her place was a focused, determined businesswoman who attacked problems with the same intensity she'd once devoted to wedding planning. "What about the debt situation?" Roger asked. Andrea's expression darkened slightly. "Still working on it. Wesley's lawyers are claiming the marriage is invalid due to fraud. Apparently, he never intended to honor the financial commitments. But that doesn't get me off the hook for the vendor contracts I signed. We'll figure something out. Actually, I might have already figured something out." Andrea pulled out a thick folder. "I've been in contact with some of the vendors. The photographer, the caterer, the florist. They're all small businesses hurt by the wedding cancellation. And they're also exactly the kind of businesses that could benefit from steady commercial contracts. The photographer does corporate events. The caterer handles business lunches. The florist provides office arrangements." Roger began to see where she was going. "You want to hire them for our commercial properties. I want to create a network. We get the government contracts to manage the Kinney property liquidations. We hire the wedding vendors as subcontractors for our commercial clients. Everyone gets paid, everyone benefits, and we build long-term business relationships." "That's actually brilliant. I learned from the best." Andrea's smile was genuine for the first time in months. "You always said the key to construction was building relationships, not just buildings." Roger's phone buzzed with a call from Don Haney. "Boss, you need to turn on Channel 7. Now." Roger grabbed the remote and unmuted the TV. A breaking news banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen. "Kinney Pharmaceutical Scandal. New Developments." The reporter was standing outside the King County Courthouse. Federal prosecutors announced today that Wesley Kinney, heir to the pharmaceutical fortune, has agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for reduced charges. Sources say Kinney is providing information about his family's offshore financial networks and connections to overseas drug cartels. Andrea's face went pale. "He's cooperating. This cooperation includes detailed financial records that could implicate other family members and business associates in the money laundering scheme." Prosecutors say Wesley Kinney's cooperation was crucial in uncovering the full scope of the criminal enterprise. The report continued with footage of Wesley being escorted into the courthouse, flanked by federal agents and lawyers. He looked haggard and defeated, a far cry from the confident prince who'd stood at the altar 3 weeks ago. "He's trying to save himself," Andrea said quietly. Roger studied his daughter's expression. "How do you feel about that?" "Honestly, relieved. If he's cooperating with prosecutors, it means he's not trying to drag me down with him. The marriage might actually be easier to dissolve if he's focused on his own legal problems." Andrea's phone rang. The caller ID showed Attorney Janet Morrison. "This is Andrea." "Yes, I saw the news. What does that mean for my situation?" She listened intently, taking notes. That's actually good news. Thank you. After hanging up, Andrea turned to Roger with the first genuinely happy expression he'd seen from her in months. Wesley's cooperation includes dissolving all joint financial obligations from the marriage. He's taking full responsibility for the wedding debt in exchange for my testimony about the family's business practices. What kind of testimony? Everything I observed during our engagement. Family meetings, financial discussions, the way they talked about their business practices. Apparently, I witnessed more criminal activity than I realized. Roger felt a chill of concern. Are you sure you want to get involved in a federal prosecution? Daddy, I'm already involved. The question is whether I'm going to be a victim or someone who helps make sure justice is served. Andrea's voice was firm. These people didn't just steal money. They sold dangerous drugs to sick people. They exploited cancer patients and elderly diabetics. They destroyed lives for profit. And they destroyed your life too. No, they didn't. They tried to, but we're not going to let them. Andrea stood up and walked to the window overlooking the construction site. You know what I realized this week? The Kinneys thought they were so clever manipulating us into that wedding debt trap. But they made one crucial mistake. What's that? They assumed you'd be too proud to ask for help, and I'd be too ashamed to fight back. They counted on us staying divided, letting our family conflict blind us to what they were really doing. Roger joined her at the window. Below them, construction workers were pouring concrete for a new foundation, their movements precise and practiced. But we're not divided anymore, Andrea continued. We're working together. And when a bond builds something, it lasts. So what's our next move? Andrea smiled. And for the first time since the engagement began, Roger saw his little girl and the strong woman she'd become in the same expression. We build our case, we win those government contracts, and we make sure everyone knows that you don't mess with the Bond family and walk away unscathed. That sounds like revenge again. No, Daddy. Revenge is what the Kinneys try to do to us. Personal, petty, and ultimately self-destructive. What we're planning is something much more powerful, which is success. We're going to be so successful, so respected, and so influential that people will remember this scandal not as the time Roger Bond's daughter married a criminal, but as the time the Bond family helped bring down the biggest pharmaceutical fraud in state history. Roger looked at his daughter with genuine pride. The spoiled princess was gone, replaced by a woman who understood that real power came not from status or wealth, but from building something lasting and valuable. There's one more thing, Andrea said, pulling out a final document. I've been working on this for a week. Roger read the papers with growing amazement. It was a business plan for Bond and Bond construction, complete with financial projections, market analysis, and strategic objectives. You want to expand beyond residential and commercial construction, he said. I want us to become the premier government contracting firm in the Pacific Northwest. Federal building projects, infrastructure development, environmental remediation. Work that matters, that helps communities, that builds something lasting. This is a 10-year plan. This is a 20-year plan. By the time we're done, Bond and Bond construction won't just be a business. It'll be a legacy. Roger set down the business plan and looked at his daughter with wonder. 3 weeks ago, she'd been focused on flower arrangements and social climbing. Now she was planning to build an empire based on honest work and community service. There's just one problem with this plan, he said. Andrea's confidence faltered slightly. What's that? You're assuming I'm going to live long enough to see it through. I'm 52, sweetheart. This is really your plan, not mine. No, Daddy. This is our plan. You're going to teach me everything you know about construction, business, and building lasting relationships. And I'm going to teach you everything I know about finance, marketing, and navigating complex organizational structures. What if I'm too set in my ways to learn new tricks? Andrea grinned. Then I guess we'll find out just how strong that Bond foundation really is. Outside the window, the construction crew finished pouring concrete and began smoothing the surface. In a few days, that foundation would be strong enough to support an entire building. With careful work and patience, it would last for generations. Roger Bond looked at his daughter and realized they were building something even more important than a business. They were building a future Chapter 8. The Empire Strikes Back. 6 months after the wedding disaster, the Bond family name appeared in headlines again, but this time for very different reasons. Roger stood in the lobby of the federal building in downtown Seattle, watching Andrea address a crowd of reporters with the confidence of someone who'd transformed crisis into opportunity. Bond and Bond Construction has been awarded the primary contract for rehabilitating the former Kinney Pharmaceutical campus, she announced, her voice clear and professional. This project will convert the failed drug manufacturing facility into affordable housing for senior citizens, providing 200 units of accessible, high-quality homes for elderly residents who were victims of pharmaceutical price gouging. The irony was perfect, and Roger knew Andrea had orchestrated it deliberately. The Kinney family's criminal empire would literally be transformed into housing for the people they'd exploited. A reporter raised her hand. Ms. Bond, critics have suggested that your family's connection to the Kinney scandal represent a conflict of interest. How do you respond? Andrea's smile was sharp but professional. My family exposed the Kinney pharmaceutical fraud at considerable personal cost. We turned down lucrative business opportunities and risked family relationships to ensure that justice was served. I'd say our track record on integrity speaks for itself. Another reporter jumped in. What's your response to allegations that this contract represents favoritism due to your cooperation with federal prosecutors? Our bid was 10% lower than the next closest competitor. Our timeline was 20% faster, and our quality ratings are consistently higher than industry standard, Andrea replied without hesitation. We won this contract because we're the best firm for the job, not because of any political connections. Roger watched his daughter field questions with the skill of a seasoned executive and marveled at the transformation. The entitled princess had become a formidable businesswoman who understood how to navigate public relations, government bureaucracy, and competitive bidding with equal expertise. After the press conference, they walked back to their office in the renovated warehouse that now served as Bond and Bond Construction headquarters. The space reflected their growth. What had started as a small family business now employed 47 people and managed contracts worth over $12 million annually. How did the Bellevue meeting go this morning? Andrea asked as they settled into Roger's office. Better than expected. The City Council approved our proposal for the waterfront development project. We start demolition on the old pier structures next month, and the environmental remediation contracts. 3 new sites. Apparently our work on the Kinney properties impressed the EPA. They want us to handle the cleanup of 2 former manufacturing sites and a contaminated retail complex. Andrea smiled with satisfaction. Our revenue projections for next year? $23 million, assuming we land the airport expansion contract. They'd come a long way from the small residential construction company Roger had built. Bond and Bond Construction now specialized in complex government projects, environmental cleanup, and infrastructure development. Their reputation for integrity and quality had opened doors throughout the region. There's something else we need to discuss, Andrea said, her tone becoming more serious. I got a call from Wesley's lawyer yesterday. Roger's jaw tightened. What does he want now? The divorce is final. Wesley's cooperation with federal prosecutors got him a reduced sentence, but he's still facing 5 years in federal prison. His lawyer wanted to discuss the possibility of a financial settlement. Settlement for what? Apparently, Wesley claims I've benefited from insider knowledge about his family's criminal activities. He's threatening to file civil suits unless we agree to certain terms. Roger felt anger rising in his chest. That's extortion. That's exactly what it is. But there's more. Andrea pulled out a folder. Wesley's not working alone. His legal team includes some very expensive attorneys who represent several construction companies that lost bids to us on recent contracts. The implication was clear. Their competitors were using Wesley's legal troubles as a way to attack Bond and Bond Construction's growing success. What kind of terms is he demanding? 20% of our gross revenue for the next 3 years, plus exclusion from any contracts related to the Kinney asset forfeiture sales. That would bankrupt us. That's the point. Our competitors can't beat us fairly, so they're trying to use legal intimidation to force us out of the market. Roger walked to the window overlooking their construction yard, where workers were loading equipment for the next day's projects. Every employee depended on the company's success for their livelihood. Every contract they won meant steady work for dozens of families. What are our options? We fight, but it won't be easy or cheap. Wesley's legal team is well-funded and politically connected. They're going to try to drag this out, force us to spend our resources on lawyers instead of business development. And if we settle, we admit guilt for crimes we didn't commit and accept financial terms that would cripple our ability to compete. Plus, it sets a precedent for future extortion attempts. Roger turned back to face his daughter. So we fight. Are you sure? This could get ugly. They're going to attack our reputation, our integrity, everything we've built. Let them try. We have something they don't. What's that? The truth. And a daughter who's learned how to use it as a weapon. Andrea's smile was fierce. Actually, I've been thinking about that. What if we don't just defend ourselves? What if we go on the offensive? What do you mean? I mean, we expose exactly who's behind this legal harassment. The construction companies funding Wesley's legal team, the political connections they're using, the pattern of using frivolous lawsuits to eliminate honest competition. That sounds dangerous. Everything we've accomplished has been dangerous. But we've proven that good people working together can overcome corrupt systems. Andrea stood up and walked to a wall covered with newspaper clippings about their success. We didn't just survive the Kinney scandal, Daddy. We turned it into a launching pad for something bigger and better. So what's your plan? We document everything. Every communication from Wesley's lawyers, every connection between his legal team and our competitors, every instance of them using the legal system to harass legitimate businesses. Then we present it all to the same federal prosecutors who handled the Kinney case. You think they'll be interested? I think they'll be very interested in evidence of a conspiracy to use the court system for anti-competitive purposes, especially when it involves attempts to intimidate witnesses who cooperated with federal investigations. Roger looked at his daughter with growing admiration. You're not just planning to defend us. You're planning to destroy them. I'm planning to make sure they never try this again, with us or with anyone else. That's a big risk, sweetheart. If we're wrong, if we can't prove conspiracy, they could destroy us in court. Andrea walked over to Roger's desk and picked up a framed photo of the two of them at a construction site, both wearing hard hats and grinning at the camera. Daddy, you taught me that solid foundations are the most important thing. But you also taught me that sometimes you have to tear down corrupt structures before you can build something lasting. And what kind of structure are we planning to build? The kind that protects honest businesses from legal extortion. The kind that ensures criminal conspiracies face consequences. The kind that makes sure our industry operates on merit instead of manipulation. Roger felt a familiar surge of pride in his daughter. That sounds like a crusade. No, Daddy. That sounds like justice. And justice, when it's done right, benefits everyone except the guilty. Outside the window, the Seattle skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, dotted with buildings that represented honest work and legitimate business. Somewhere in those gleaming towers, their enemies were planning the next phase of their legal assault. But Roger Bond was no longer the man who'd walked out of a wedding reception in righteous fury. He was a businessman who'd learned to channel his principles into strategic action. And his daughter was no longer the entitled princess who'd cared more about social status than family loyalty. Together, they were about to remind their enemies why you don't pick fights with people who know how to build things that last. The foundation was solid. The structure was strong. Now it was time to prove just how devastating the Bond family could be when they worked together. Chapter 9. The Final Foundation. 1 year after the wedding disaster, Roger Bond stood in the main conference room of the federal building, watching the last act of the Kinney family drama unfold. Across the table, Wesley Kinney sat in an orange prison jumpsuit, flanked by federal marshals and what remained of his legal team. The conspiracy case had taken 8 months to build, but Andrea's methodical documentation had provided prosecutors with everything they needed. The construction companies that had funded Wesley's legal harassment campaign were now facing their own federal charges for anti-competitive conspiracy and attempted witness intimidation. Mr. Kinney, the federal prosecutor said, You understand that this plea agreement requires you to provide complete cooperation regarding the legal harassment campaign directed at Bond and Bond Construction? Wesley's voice was barely a whisper. Yes. And you acknowledge that this campaign was funded and directed by Hartman Construction, McKnight Development, and Terry Engineering in an attempt to eliminate legitimate competition for government contracts. Yes. Roger felt no satisfaction watching his former son-in-law admit to crimes that could have destroyed everything he and Andrea had built. The man in the orange jumpsuit was a broken shell of the confident prince who'd once stood at an altar promising to love and cherish his daughter. But justice wasn't about satisfaction. It was about consequences and protection and ensuring that corruption faced accountability. The financial restitution aspect of this agreement, the prosecutor continued, requires Mr. Kinney and his co-conspirators to pay damages of $4.7 million to Bond and Bond Construction for legal expenses, lost business opportunities, and punitive damages. Andrea sat beside Roger, taking notes with the same methodical precision she brought to every aspect of their business. The money would allow them to expand into new markets, hire more employees, and take on even larger projects. But more importantly, it would send a message to every other company that might consider using legal intimidation to eliminate honest competition. After the hearing, Roger and Andrea walked out of the federal building into the bright Seattle sunshine. Their legal nightmare was finally over, but their business success was just beginning. So what's next? Roger asked as they reached his truck. Well, we officially break ground on the Kinney Campus housing project next month. The airport expansion contract starts in the spring. And I got a call this morning about a potential federal infrastructure contract that could be worth $30 million. $30 million? Highway renovation project for the Washington State Department of Transportation. If we get it, we'll need to hire another 50 employees and open a second office. Roger shook his head in amazement. A year ago, you were planning wedding centerpieces. Now you're talking about infrastructure contracts worth more than some company's annual revenue. A year ago, I thought success meant marrying rich and joining country clubs. Now I know success means building something that creates jobs, serves communities, and lasts long enough for my children to inherit. They drove back to the Bond and Bond Construction headquarters, the renovated warehouse that had become the symbol of their partnership. The parking lot was full of trucks and equipment, evidence of the bustling business they'd built together. Inside, the main office buzzed with activity. Project managers coordinated with site supervisors, administrative staff processed contracts and permits, and engineers reviewed blueprints for their various projects. The small family business had become a regional powerhouse that employed families throughout the area. Mr. Bond, Stephanie Henderson, now their office manager, approached with a stack of messages. Channel 4 News wants to interview you about the conspiracy case verdict. Seattle Business Journal is requesting a feature story about the company's growth. And the mayor's office called about a possible city council commendation. Roger looked at the messages with bemused wonder. The man who'd once been seen as an embarrassment to his daughter's social aspirations was now being celebrated as a business leader and champion of integrity. Schedule the interviews for next week, Andrea told Stephanie. And make sure they understand that this story isn't about revenge or legal victories. It's about what happens when honest businesses work together to build something lasting. After Stephanie left, Roger and Andrea walked out to the construction yard where their crews were preparing for the next day's projects. Workers cleaned equipment, loaded trucks, and reviewed tomorrow's assignments with the practiced efficiency of people who took pride in their craftsmanship. You know what I realized during the trial? Andrea said as they watched the activity around them. What's that? The Kinney family thought wealth and connections made them untouchable. Our competitors thought money and legal manipulation could eliminate honest competition. Wesley thought he could use the court system to destroy us out of spite. And they all made the same fundamental mistake. They thought success was about tearing other people down instead of building something valuable up. Roger nodded, understanding. Solid foundations versus quick fixes. Exactly. We didn't beat them by being richer or more connected or more ruthless. We beat them by being better at what we do and more committed to doing it right. A young worker, one of the dozen new hires they'd brought on over the past 6 months, approached them nervously. "Mr. Bond? Ms. Bond? I just wanted to say thank you. For the job, I mean, and for fighting those legal battles. My dad worked construction for 30 years before his company went under because of bid manipulation and corrupt contractors. He always said honest companies couldn't compete against that kind of corruption." Andrea smiled warmly. "What's your name?" "Troy Hartman, ma'am. And my dad was wrong. Honest companies can compete. They can win. They just have to be willing to fight for what's right." After Troy walked away, Roger felt a familiar surge of pride, not just in his daughter or his business, but in the values that had guided them through their darkest moments. "He's right, you know," Andrea said quietly, "about honest companies being able to compete, but only if they're willing to fight. Is that what we did? Fight. We did more than fight, Daddy. We proved that integrity isn't just a nice ideal, it's a competitive advantage. When you build your reputation on solid ground, people trust you with bigger projects, better contracts, more important work." Roger looked around the construction yard, at the employees heading home to their families, at the evidence of honest work and legitimate success surrounding them. "So what's our next project?" Andrea grinned, and Roger saw both the determined businesswoman she'd become and the little girl who used to build sandcastles with him on summer afternoons. "The biggest one yet. We're going to build a company that lasts for generations. One that proves every day that character matters more than connections, that quality matters more than politics, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply building something so successful that your enemies can only watch in amazement." That sounds like a solid foundation. The most solid foundation there is, Daddy. The kind that gets stronger under pressure instead of cracking. As the sun set over Seattle, Roger Bond stood beside his daughter in the construction yard they'd built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared success. The spoiled princess was gone, replaced by a formidable businesswoman who understood that real power came from building lasting value. The bitter father was gone too, replaced by a man who'd learned that love meant supporting dreams instead of controlling them, and that the strongest foundations were built on mutual respect rather than rigid expectations. Together, they'd survived betrayal, corruption, legal harassment, and family conflict. They'd transformed crisis into opportunity, scandal into success, and broken relationships into unbreakable partnerships. But most importantly, they'd proven that sometimes the best way to defeat your enemies isn't to destroy them. It's to build something so magnificent that their failures become irrelevant by comparison. The Bond family foundation was solid, and everything they built on it would last forever. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Seattle Times business section featured a cover story about Bond and Bond Construction, now the largest minority-owned construction firm in the Pacific Northwest. The article noted that the company had grown from a small family business to a regional powerhouse, employing over 300 people and managing contracts worth more than $150 million annually. Andrea Bond, now CEO, was quoted as saying, "Our success isn't measured just in revenue or projects completed. It's measured in families supported, communities served, and the principle that honest work creates lasting value." Roger Bond, now chairman of the board, spent his days mentoring young entrepreneurs and teaching construction management at the University of Washington. His course on ethical business practices in competitive industries had a waiting list of over 200 students. Wesley Kinney was released from federal prison after serving 4 years of his sentence. His attempts to rebuild his life were hindered by his criminal record and the complete destruction of his family's reputation. He currently works as a night manager at a suburban pharmacy, earning minimum wage, dispensing the same medications his family once sold at criminal markups. The Kinney Pharmaceutical Campus housing project was completed on time and under budget, providing affordable homes for 247 senior citizens. A bronze plaque in the lobby reads, "Built by Bond and Bond Construction, where character creates value." Martin and Glenda Kinney lost their estate, their social standing, and most of their personal wealth to federal asset forfeiture and victim restitution. They currently live in a modest apartment in Tacoma, supported by Social Security and the bitter knowledge that their criminal empire destroyed not just their victims, but their own family legacy. The construction companies that conspired to destroy Bond and Bond Construction through legal harassment paid millions in fines and damages. Two went out of business entirely. Their former executives were banned from bidding on government contracts for 10 years. But the most significant change was in the relationship between a father and daughter who learned that the strongest foundations aren't built from concrete and steel. They're built from love, respect, and a shared commitment to creating something worthwhile. Some structures are designed to last a lifetime. Others are built to last forever. The Bond family had chosen forever. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.